What sectors do you think will grow as a result of this crisis by Kate. So are there any trends that you see forming? I mean, obviously, like the health industry is going to be really interesting to see how things go on. The airline industry, travel industry, different things like that. Are there any industries or sectors that you're looking to invest in, like after this, or during this, as things go on, even?
Yeah, I mean, so I think right now, the metaphor I've been using is right now it's like we're all flying in an airplane and we're in such a thick cloud that we can't even see like 6 inches in front of the airplane. And so to make big decisions, particularly investment decisions, when there's that much uncertainty, it's very hard. Because whether it's a few weeks or a few months, when the nose of the plane starts to poke out through the cloud, and all of a sudden you can see so much more, and seeing more, the metaphor is like having more information and data to process, you're just going to make better decisions. And so we're still investing even right now. In fact, we've either closed or will soon close a whole bunch of investments, mostly in existing portfolio companies with new investors to help make sure they have cash, some in brand new companies. It's possible, but it's hard. As you start to get through the other side, not to the point where the crisis is gone, but at least we know what the hell's going on and have a sense for like how bad is it going to be and when is it likely to end. When you start to have that information, even well before you get to the end of it, it's much easier to make decisions. As we think about it, there are essentially 3 categories of companies out there. Those who are benefiting from the crisis, those who are getting crushed by the crisis, and everything in the middle. The ones who are benefiting from the crisis, it's a really small number, unfortunately. But it's companies like video game companies, because guess what? We're all at home and kids are mostly at home. And while in theory they're doing some online learning at school, they're probably playing a lot more video games than they were before. And so there's a series of industries that are benefiting. Other examples include online learning companies. There's a whole bunch of online learning companies, or any company where everything is virtual or online. And then there's some near-term companies like grocery businesses, which are benefiting massively. Consumers aren't eating in restaurants anymore; they're eating in grocery bought food. But for the most part, we don't think any that attracts our capital because they will all go back to normal when the COVID stuff passes. So we view it as generally a short-term bump. Those are wonderful companies to work at right now, and they'll probably be wonderful companies to work at after this. And they have a specific and unique advantage today relative to, if that's like 3 or 4% of all companies, while the other 96% are hurting, those companies are likely to go on the attack, start trying to hire talent that they otherwise couldn't access, and make investments that other companies just won't make right now. And that's a special bunch. And if I were looking for a job, I'd probably look for a job at one of those companies because they're probably the only ones that are hiring as opposed to sort of protecting cash and so forth. The other end of the spectrum are companies that are just beaten down right now. Anything in travel, hospitality, restaurants, events, and so forth. And I actually, from an investor's standpoint, think like that's a really interesting place to be investing. It's hard to price those investments, but the idea that in general, there's not a whole lot of capital flowing into those sectors means it's an attractive place to invest because you can probably get pretty good deals. And over time, the world should head back to normal. Whether normal is in 6 months or 24 months, I think it's very unclear. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to if some brilliant scientists out there can figure out how to mitigate the effects of the disease or vaccinate us all against the disease, that will be the linchpin. But that's the other extreme. Everyone in the middle is affected in the short term to some extent, in part because we're just in an economic recession or maybe even depression, and that just brings everything down. And so while there are a few opportunities that we're thinking about that are specifically related to COVID and how the world thinks of itself in on a post-COVID basis, most of the investments we're thinking about are still the fundamental roadmaps we've been pursuing for a while. And we're just trying to think about how badly the COVID crisis will affect them and on what timeline. In terms of truly COVID-specific things, we're thinking a lot about cleanliness and cleaning because we think post-COVID, people will want to be in a cleaner environment. And what does that mean and what kind of startups will succeed there? We're only starting to think about it and hear about different ideas. So that's a COVID-specific roadmap. But like I said, I think the COVID-specific stuff will be few and far between. Outside of healthcare, I think within healthcare, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. That's not my expertise. I've got a couple of colleagues who focus on nothing but healthcare. maybe you can host them for a different event and talk about what they'll likely do.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think a lot of stuff is going to be changing after this, especially in those industries that you mentioned. Healthcare is, I think there's a huge shift that's about to happen within healthcare, but it's a complicated industry in of itself. We have a couple more questions here, and I'm going to kind of put two of these together. So from Sully, we have, what would be an example of a key insight from one of your past investments? Or have there been any, what I would say is, has there been any key insights that you've seen from multiple of your past investments? And then there's another question that's, how have the profiles of entrepreneurs you've seen changed over the years of investing? So maybe get into some of the key insights that you've seen in your past investments, and maybe how have those insights, have they changed at all? And have you seen entrepreneurs and founders do things differently now that's winning now versus how things used to be 10 years ago?
Yeah, so the first question, an example of a key insight. I'll give you an old one. I don't like sharing other people's insights. It's their job to share them. But if it's old enough, then I feel like it's in the public domain, just to give you a sense for how I thought about it at the time. And so I'll go back to Yelp in 2005. And when Jeremy Stoppelman took me through his overview and vision for Yelp, the term SEO, or search engine optimization, didn't really exist, or it was a sort of very niche-y subject that not a lot of people were paying attention to. But he described the following insight to me. He said, as we attract people to write content onto the Yelp website in the form of a review, that review in turn gets indexed by Google as fresh and new content, which is what the Google search engine thirsts for constantly. And as a result, Google prioritizes that content over all other content, stale content and so forth, into Google results, which means that the creation of that review on Yelp creates more opportunity for Yelp to be seen on Google. As Yelp is seen on Google, more people will end up clicking on links to come to Yelp, and some fraction of those people will in turn create more reviews. And so the insight he shared with me was this incredibly powerful cycle where review content begets traffic from Google, begets more review content, and it reinforces itself. And so he could articulate why and how his business could grow without him having to spend tons of money on consumer acquisition. And furthermore, he understood the power of having good review content. And in fact, when we invested in Yelp, there were, I think, 5 or 6 other companies doing precisely the same thing. City Search, Insider Pages, Judy's Book, Zip and Go, literally 5, and they were all extremely well funded. In fact, all of them more well funded than Yelp. But Jeremy's insight was the review content has to be extremely high, because if the review content says, if you like pizza, go buy from Joe's Pizza, the Google crawler didn't view that to be nearly as valuable as a 7-paragraph review of a given restaurant or dentist or what have you. And so rather than trying to build a massive quantity of reviews covering tons of places, Jeremy kept Yelp to just San Francisco for a very long period of time. And he also ensured the social norms on the platform were to create detailed and interesting reviews, not 2-liners. In contrast with his competitors, who would basically say, if you create 5 reviews and invite 5 people to our service, we'll send you a $5 Starbucks card. And lo and behold, what did they get? They got tons of people who had 5 reviews, but those reviews all sucked. They were 1 or 2 lines. And they got people to come join, but they weren't really joining. They were just signing up so someone could get their $5 gift card. Yelp never did any of that. Yelp created a whole bunch of systems that had really deep, high-quality reviews.